This is the Darshan Talks podcast. Regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. I am Major Hoffman. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.
Hey guys, my name's Major. I'm here with Darshan, and in this episode of Darshan Talks, we're going to discuss 23andMe, ethical engagement.
That sounds fascinating, doesn't it? Maybe we should...
Do I need a ring? Is this... What is...
So maybe we should talk about what sort of brought this to our attention and why we're discussing it. A couple of months ago, 23andMe announced that they're going to sell the data to that they've collected from all these different people to I think it was Glaxo for $500 million. And the question, and 23andMe, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is one of those companies where you send a little bit of your blood and they'll tell you what your ancestry looks like. And there are a couple of different companies like that, and they all sort of are trying to figure out what they can do with this information. And genetic data obviously is one of the most private and personal bits of information that anyone can have. So the big question becomes: Is it bioethical? Is it ethical of 23andMe to sell people's data? So Major, I'm going to let you introduce how we decide if something's ethical or not. So go ahead.
Okay. So we decided. Well, this
No, it's
isn't
not
us. This is
A lot smarter people came up with
this is not the Major Darshan. This is we don't have a checkoff list, but the four core principles of bioethics, right?
There's beneficence. Beneficence. Yep, there you go.
Beneficence. I can never pronounce that one or the next one. But this is doing good.
Correct.
Is it the intention of doing good for the person?
Part, yeah.
And then generally that gets looped in with the next one, non-malfeasance.
And just to be clear, if there are other bioethicists out there, I'd love to hear from you if you treat them separately, and if you do treat them separately, how would you analyze them differently? So feel free to message it.
And how many syllables you add into non-malfeasance. So non-malfeasance is trying not to hurt the person you're working with, or you're in the trial, or whatever you're working with. And then the third one is autonomy, which speaks to the patient's ability to participate or not to participate in said testing. And the fourth one is justice. This has to do with the equality. Is that
to equally benefit, if you will,
for the patient or the person?
I mean, again,
equally
we're
benefit.
Generalizing. There are literally books written on this topic. We're trying to bring it down to like the lowest common denominator. And I'll probably get crucified on Twitter when I put this out there as simply as I have. But those are the core basic principles. And I have bioethicist friends who will just go, "I can't believe you put that out there as something you think is completely valid." It's not.
Now, this isn't just 23andMe though. With the selling of genetic information, it just so happens that 23andMe is the bigger name. There are other companies that do collect the genetic
one of the more
information.
famous ones was yesterday's news was that one of the other companies announced that they released genetic information to the FBI. Is that okay?
Yeah. And also, is that so? Then you're gonna have the question of like, how accurate is that? I've got friends who do these tests, and they'll get wrong names.
But it doesn't matter what your name is.
Falsify that.
That's the funny part. So there's a bit out there where they and there's an article that I'm happy to link to, but the article basically talks about how at this point they have enough data from Caucasians to be able to identify every Caucasian in the United States with a very high level of accuracy. So whether or not you give your data, I can tell you with, I'm making up a number here because I don't remember what the exact number is, but something like 70% accuracy who you're related to. But that's exactly the groan.
Well, I mean, you see stories about like people, getting these kits for like a holiday or like for birthdays or what have you. Then they get the results back and they realize their parents aren't their parents, or their siblings aren't their siblings, or there's some weird scenario that just digs up skeletons in the closet. And that's a whole other story. But with regards to like this, this is privacy. This is like the definition of privacy, like who you are.
So that's the question. You know what's funny to me?
What does this mean?
One of the really interesting things to me is this is considered to be less valuable than people's browsing data, so from a pure monetary standpoint, which I thought was fascinating. So someone actually sat down and analyzed that,
like,
and I'm sure I could if I really got pushed to find that study. But it's something I'm making up numbers here, but it's like 11 cents per data record for genetic information, but 21 cents for browsing records, because I can sell you more stuff based on your browsing records.
The reason I was asking, and the reason I asked why, specifically is because is it the same people who might happen to be politicians who had to have a how to use Twitter moment? So there were some politicians recently. I want to say maybe in the Senate, but they actually, like, Twitter came in and said, here's how you use Twitter. So like. They're just that detached from how things are, and when there was such a big issue about metadata and cell phone, and this is your, if your genetic information is the phone call, your information on top of that, your birthday, your name, your interest, your address, that's the metadata of your genetic information.
But the funny thing is that valuation wasn't being done by politicians; it was done by VCs. Mm-hmm. So private companies are saying this is what's valuable to me.
Well, right. It's all about but that's all about the demand, right? And if people don't know if it doesn't exist to people, if they don't know it exists, then there is no demand. So I can see that changing pretty quick. Well, I hope it changes pretty quick anyway. I'm really shooken up right now about this, apparently.
So let's go through each one. Let's go through each point. So beneficence. Who would you
beneficence.
Do you think that 23andMe selling data benefits people? Really? Why is that?
No. Well, this is selfish. Okay, does it benefit people? Because here's the problem, though. Like, from what perspective are we looking at this from? If they're looking at it, like, on an individual perspective, oh man, it's like, who gave them the authority to sell my stuff?
So you apparently signed that off.
If it's doing good,
participated in that process, you actually gave your informed consent. It was in the documents. Sure,
by the way,
and I haven't either, but I haven't done it on different principles.
Right.
That's a different discussion.
Right, for sure. So, but and you signed over your right to make that decision, or to for them to be your proxy to make this decision or whatever. Yes, this is doing good. But is it really?
So who is it doing good to is the first question, right? So to humanity.
What's their reasoning? They're selling it to pharma companies.
Discover new drugs that will treat diseases.
How does my genetic information
have you heard of the Henrietta Lacks case? Okay, so the Henrietta Lacks case was they took someone's cells.
For those who aren't.
And at this point, there are entire industries based off of her cells. Correct.
And her family didn't benefit.
But to your point of who benefits from that, people have benefited, and tons of diseases have been cured because of it.
Oh, absolutely.
So when you now take individual people's data and combine that and add multiple groups' data, you not only have the power of big data, but the power of individual data sets.
And to be clear, I'm honestly I'm okay with, like, my genetic information being sold, just as long as my information is not.
See, I have a problem with that. I have a problem with my genetic information being sold without me benefiting from it. And what I mean by the word benefiting is I specifically want to.
Well, there you go. I want to benefit.
For it.
That's what I'm talking about, man. Right? No, that's how I want to benefit from it as well. But we're talking non-financial.
Well, I'm talking all
gains,
kinds of gains,
right?
But in this specific instance.
Well, no, I'm for sure. In this instant, yeah. But with regards to the purpose of selling to a pharma company, and that's for a greater good of, disease, curing, etc.
But does it help
going forward? But
that?
as does it help me? Right.
And
does it come full circle? And will it do so in my lifetime?
We don't know. So I would say, just with the principle of does it help you, I'd say probably not. Just because we don't know how the data would be used. I can see a very good argument being made the other way, but let's for now say no. Let's now take autonomy. Autonomy being your ability to say yes or no. There was a form given. If you participate in this, you probably signed that form without which they wouldn't take it. Is that okay? Was that an autonomous decision?
Or was
Probably not extortion. There was nothing in there that says you need to participate. You're the one who chose to be part of it.
No, you're right. But if you're, I mean, now the two end results of the decision, it's not exactly as, or is not as severe as, a prisoner, being told if you participate in these tests, for each one you get, a month knocked off, like a month knocked off of your sentence. Like, it's not that extreme, but you can argue it to be in a similar vein, right? Like, the benefit that you get, the minute you're receiving a benefit, the prisoner is receiving, the theoretical prisoner is receiving a theoretical benefit of an additional month or so. Here? Well, the person being tested, we're talking about, like, so in this instance, my benefit, if I were to, if I were to sign this over, I would assume my benefit to be knowing my genetic information, right? You
got what you wanted.
And the prisoner gets what they want.
Sure.
With time
But was in the prisoner's case, were they able to make a informed decision? Did they have the ability, or was that ability taken away from them because they were literally in prison? What is your prison in your scenario?
Lack of knowledge.
Well, you literally had a piece of paper telling you this. Now, the fact that you didn't read it, is that on you?
Right. Is it like, then do I become the entitled guy who is like, now give that to me? And with, like, is that the next step there? Like, at what point does it become my responsibility to say, okay, I can make these decisions? Like, am I qualified to make these decisions? Like, who determines that I can make this decision? Because that's part of the autonomy, right?
Most people would agree that anyone of sane mind is qualified to make their own decisions. If it's too complicated, you have what's called a learned intermediary. So that's why physicians are the ones who write prescriptions. But there's really no argument that you need a learned intermediary to decide for you if you want to give your data to participate in a big data experiment where lives might be changed, where lives might be saved. How is it any different from getting informed consent for a clinical trial?
And see, I just proved right there that it's very difficult to not. So I'm trying to take the cynical perspective of like, well, how can I somehow wiggle my way out of this by saying I'm not capable of making decisions on my own?
And I'm not sure you can. So I would say from an autonomy perspective, I think you'd probably be okay. My concern, however, is that so many people didn't know. So I have never read their terms and conditions. I haven't read their version of them. But the question then becomes, did they have a duty to bring it more up front and center? Assuming they did have it up front and center, it didn't work, should they have done more in some way? Or was this sort of a hidden trick that no one knew about? Now you start comparing that to something like GDPR, which says that if a European citizen's data is out there, they have the right to withdraw that. Now, how does GSK, for example, in this case, go, okay, we'll return your data? How does 23andMe say, okay, we'll return your data? And should American citizens have those same rights? And then that takes us to justice. Is everyone benefiting equally? And I think when you're using something like this, for the most part, some more equal than others. Things like the 23andMe, I would imagine, is benefiting more than others. Or do you see that differently?
Well, no, I don't. And I say that because those who, and I know I'm making general statements here, but those who can afford, generally speaking, those who can afford a test by 23andMe would be more likely to benefit than someone
Yeah.
in a third world country, right? Like, just because they're not able, 23andMe, they're not exactly going out there being like walking around being like, hey, I know you're asking for food,
Right,
but
right.
here's
It's
a
not.
genetic-
It's not. See, that to me could be a different argument if you were in that scenario, and someone said, "You know what?
Right.
I will give you free food if you will take this genetic test." But that's not the scenario we're in right now.
You
What's
shove
that?
this swab in your cheek. Right. That's not where. I was commenting on the process of the actual test itself, but like
Right.
bread for swab, something like that. But right, we're not talking about that level of inequality. We're talking about if I were to do this, I would be more likely to see a benefit in my lifetime than someone
Yeah.
in
So
a third world country.
maybe 23andMe is being ethical. I'm surprised by the result. I was actually expecting to go the other way, but I'm wrong.
You expected me to
I
say,
wasn't expecting
what?
to hear, but I am.
You were
So I find that fascinating. What about you?
okay. I didn't hear. You
I didn't expect
you
that when we did
what?
the analysis, because we said beneficence,
Mm-hmm.
maybe, autonomy, yes, justice, yes. Final score, 23andMe wins.
So I mean, we are linking the first two, the beneficence and the non-malfeasance, in together. So non-malfeasance, they're not
hurting
so
people.
They're kind
not
of
trying to hurt people.
0 for 4,
Yeah, sure.
or 4 for 4, 4
There you
out of
go.
4. New rating system that we just invented with bioethics. If we just coined the term bioethics, who knew? No, I'm joking, obviously. But well, guys, thanks a lot for sticking around and listening to us, talk about the ethical engagement of selling genetic information. Next, we'll talk about
Yeah, that
drug
should be
pricing
interesting.
and bioethics. Right? That's a big deal, man.
Thanks, guys.
But we'll see you then.
Thank you for listening to the Darshan Talks podcast, regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. I am Major Hoffman. If you have any questions for Darshan, reach out via Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.